Excellent. Good. Hello, Arthur. You can come in. Arthur's my old boy. Good. Well, hi everybody, and welcome to another Facebook Live in the group. We've got the wonderful Michelle from Pooch Parenting here this evening. Hi, Michelle.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Well, we've been talking about kind of getting you in the group for a little while, and obviously with schedules and that kind of thing, it's now's the time. And we had a wonderful conversation off air actually a few weeks ago, and I'm really excited about our conversation today because there's a lot of different areas that we need to talk about, I think, and especially in relation to your specialty, which is working with families and looking at all the different care and support needs of busy parents, children, dogs. There's a lot of different aspects there. So say hi in the group. Let us know where you're at. I can see people coming in now, which is great. Yes, hi, let us know where you're at. So Michelle, good. So there's a lot for us to pull at today, I think, and it's interesting because the whole group really is very much looking at thinking about the emotional experience of the dog and also the caregivers actually, but thinking about a very dog-centric approach and what that looks like and understanding that individual lived experience of the dog. But there are certain situations that we have to kind of zoom out a little bit and think about things in a more rounder way. And I think working with families is very much that, because when we step in, we're almost like social workers, aren't we? We're stepping into that environment. You have all those different nervous systems, all those different kind of entities that have their own care and support needs. And finding that middle safe ground can be a bit of a challenge. And that's what we're going to very much look at today and think about some of those aspects. But before we do that, hi everybody. Hi Heather, hi Leslie, hi Jean, hi Winky, hi Marianne, hi Maggie. So great, lots of different people all over the place, which is always good to see. Let's start off a little bit with you though, Michelle, if we can.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your own kind of story really, and how you got to do the work you do and where those early inspirations came from to give you the mindset that you have.
Yes, thank you. And I apologize for if I'm blinding you. I have big windows here and it's just with the seasons, the sun is hitting me. So it should change in a little bit. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. So my name is Michelle Stern. I am the founder of Pooch Parenting. I specialize in supporting parents who are raising children and dogs together at the same time at all different ages and developmental stages. I say that because I think it's really important to have a distinction because I support families before the kids even show up. So if a family is going through the adoption process or the surrogacy process, or they're in the foster care system and they're thinking about bringing in children who aren't already there, and then of course those who are pregnant or expecting, there's a lot that can be done to support people from different stages of their parenting journey. The reason that I am here instead of any other niche is that I am a parent also. I have two kids who are now 22 and 24. My daughter was fairly easy to raise. She's a biological daughter, and my son is adopted from Guatemala, and he was very, very, very difficult to raise for a lot of different reasons. One thing I learned after adopting him, and probably not until he was about 10 years old, is that children who are adopted have experienced early childhood trauma. I never knew that then. I know a lot more now than I used to, as probably all of us feel in a group like this. We're so much more informed than we used to be, which is really good because we're open to growth. But parenting him was really hard, and it nearly tore our family apart. He had trouble regulating his feelings and his emotions. And then in response to that, we had trouble regulating our feelings and emotions. Our daughter responded to that in a really interesting way. She wanted to be like the perfect kid to compensate for the fact that he was so hard. So that it was really hard parenting him. And it was entirely different than I expected. And interestingly enough, this came after my journey of becoming a high school teacher. By the time Ari joined our family, I had been an educator for 5 years and taught high school, which many of you probably are cringing right now, but teenagers, I love them. They're hilarious. They're funny. They're a lot like dogs in that they're unpredictable, but many of them really are eager to please. But some of them couldn't care less what you think because we haven't found the right way to motivate them, right? So teaching, learning how to teach up to 33 or 35, 14, 15, and 16-year-olds at a time taught me a lot that I use in my world as a dog behavior consultant and trainer. So I came in as an educator and as a parent, and I returned to dogs as a true love. I was going to become a vet until I took organic chemistry in college, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. It weeded me out. I don't think I have really the brains for that type of processing. So I ended up teaching high school biology and environmental science instead. But dogs were always a passion. Animals were always a passion. And serendipitously later, as my kids were growing up, I had also founded and ran a cooking school for children, starting with kids who were as young as 2 years old. And there are a lot of parallels of cooking with kids and raising kids with puppies, by the way, because there's sharp objects and hot things. And it's very similar because puppies are sharp and a little spicy too. In any case, I, through a friend, got reconnected to my childhood dog mentor. She ran the behavior program at our shelter where I was a volunteer as a child and went to summer camp and stuff. And she ended up having this brilliant behavior program. Her name is Trish King, and she had an amazing advanced dog behavior program. And I dove into that and took that, and she took me on as her mentee, and I got to attend cases with her. It was amazing. And while I was going through her program, I was thinking, there's a niche that I think probably needs some specialist experience, not just the dog behavior stuff, but somebody who really likes kids and somebody who really likes parents and who has gone through the ringer as a parent myself, because I didn't know if I'd make it, honestly. I didn't know if my son would still be alive by the time he hit 18. I mean, when he had his 18th birthday, I was crying with him and I was like, I didn't think you would still be with us. And now he's 22. He's remarkable and he would like to become a flight attendant. Like, he's amazing. But I honestly didn't know if we'd get to this place where I would still like him, to be honest. So I thought that I could bring in an approach that took all of my life experience up until that point, plus my love of dogs, and put them together in a way where I could serve folks who aren't really seen by a lot of dog trainers. A lot of dog trainers just say, oh, well, you shouldn't let your kid do that thing. Or maybe you shouldn't have kids if you have dogs. Or I've heard a lot of things that are crazy, rather than a professional who comes in and says, wow, your life looks really hard right now. How can I help you be the best parent you can be to your child and to your dog? And how can we together help everybody feel physically safe and emotionally safe in the same household? And in some cases, maybe the dog doesn't fit. Maybe the dog really doesn't like kids. Maybe the dog is really too sensitive to be in a house that has up to 8-10 kids at it any time because they have play dates and scout meetings and birthday parties. And some families are just too busy. Some parents don't want to structure things. They want to be more go with the flow types of parents. And for many dogs, that's too hard. They need to know what the structure is in the home and what's to be expected. And so my goal is to come in with empathy to support the whole family, and to help parents feel like they have someone they can talk to who's not going to come down on them like a ton of bricks. I had a meeting a couple days ago with a woman who was in tears, and she said, I tried talking to other parents and they thought I was a horrible person because I hadn't euthanized my dog or I hadn't got rid of my dog. The dog had a pretty significant bite history. She said, but then I tried to get support from dog people and they told me that my kids were monsters. And she's like, and I didn't know who else to talk to. And I'm so glad that I met you because you're making me feel seen. So that's really my goal.
That's really powerful what you mentioned there, because listening to you talk, Michelle, you kind of come at this almost like a social worker, I think. I think what's important is we're allowed to have our own judgments. We're allowed to think, well, that's whatever. We're allowed to think that because we will. But I think what you're talking about there is overcoming those kind of judgments and those thoughts and thinking, right, I'm not going to let them drive my response, though. I'm going to say, right, I see it. I get it. I'm going to provide that safe space so that you can offload, because that kind of dogs versus kids, that must be what it feels like. Because like you say, you'll have those members of the family, even within a family unit, right? Those members of the family who empathize more with the dogs. And you got to control your kids better, and those who are more against the dogs, you shouldn't have the dog. And you get that from the professionals as well. When you have other parents, you say the kind of kid professionals, I suppose, are the parents saying, get rid of the dog, and then dog professionals saying, it's all your fault for being a bad parent because your kids shouldn't be doing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really common thing that a lot of parents go through. And I think, like you say, sometimes the reality is that family dynamic isn't going to work very well. But that can be an informed choice, which is heartbreaking, actually. But that can be supported. But there's less chance of that with somebody coming in with your type of approach, which is, okay, I hear you. You tell me that experience, and I'll hear you, and I get it. Before we come on to that, though, I just want to thank you for being so open about your own kind of journey.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's refreshing, actually, to hear a professional, obviously we're talking about dogs here, but to kind of share your own frustrations and sensitivities and sense of inadequacies that we all experience bringing up your child, and how all consuming that can be, and how difficult and challenging it is to navigate that. But I think there's a lovely bit of that story, which is it kind of all works out in the end. If you can get to that end, I think that's the key. That must have been a big thing for you, because I think, but being a high school teacher, it's a bit like, I guess, being a whatever you do, really. And thinking about things from a very academic point of view, and these kids, they just need support, and we've got to do these kind of things. And then you get given the hard reality of supporting another living sentient being who is struggling on many different levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I came in when I was a brand new teacher. This is actually really funny. I don't know if I've shared this before publicly, but when I got this job interview for the job that I ended up taking for my first 5 years of my career, the assistant principal, his name was John, and he was so great. He was so positive and so encouraging. I was young. I was 24 years old. I had no confidence in my own, honestly, in my academics, because like I said, I mean, I struggled academically. I mean, I made it. I got my biology degree at a really good university, but it was not easy. In retrospect, I probably have some learning disabilities that I didn't know about, and I just tried to push through and I made it. But I didn't feel like a biologist, I didn't feel like I understood those technicalities. And so when he offered me this job, I said, I think you're making a mistake. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I said, I don't know enough. I don't know enough to teach biology to teenagers, because teenagers are smart and I have to know a lot to teach smart kids. And he goes, Michelle, sweetie, you just have to know a little bit more than they do. It's okay. You have your degree. You do know more than they do. And so I was coming from this place of like, oh gosh, and so some of the kids that I worked with were so brilliant, and they probably did know more than me, but I was able to frame, and this is where this relates to dogs, where you try to take the situation that you're given and you try to make it work with whatever tools you've got. So in my case, when I had a student that I thought might be smarter than me, then I pushed them to demonstrate their knowledge in new and creative ways, and maybe to teach their peers who didn't know it as well as they did, right? So how creative could they be? Could they do an art project that demonstrated knowledge? Could they do make a film that demonstrated knowledge? Could they make a computer thing? This was the days before PowerPoint. We had something called Hyper Studio, which was ridiculous, but it was kind of a similar thing where I was like, let's teach other kids. Hey, could you teach the middle schoolers about this kind of thing? And it was a very big challenge for them, because as you know, some people who are very intellectual don't have the ability to reach the masses with their communication skills. They don't. So it was a really interesting thing, I think. And then now, even now to this day, I feel like I'm using those same skills where I was coming in as an educator and I had to get really creative with the strategies that I would employ with varying students. I had some students that were just scared of science. And so I had to motivate them to find a way that it would be relevant to their life also, right? So you get these huge ends of the spectrum of people who come in claiming to know all the things. And then you have people who come in claiming to know none of the things. And I find that I have the same experience with the range of clients that I work with. So for example, I have a club for parents who just want ongoing support. And in there, I have a veterinarian. And I was like, really? And at first I had this moment of like, oh gosh, a veterinarian. What could I possibly offer a veterinarian that she doesn't already know? And then I thought, wait a minute, don't be ridiculous. Veterinarians know a ton about a ton of things, but they don't typically know a lot about behavior. And there's a lot of things that she doesn't know about having a baby. And I know what will be hard for her dog Buster about living with her new baby that she doesn't know yet, right? And so, and then also in the same group, I have a therapist who knows a lot about children, but she doesn't know about children with her dog because she's not a dog expert, right? So what I love about my job so very much is that I get to be creative and I get to think on my feet and I get to try to challenge folks to incorporate strategies into their life that make their life easier, regardless of the things they know or regardless of the things they think they know. Because what they don't know is the experience of parenting at the same time as having a dog in the household, right? Some of these people are dog experts and some of these people are kid experts, but very few of them have that knowledge of the two together. And so I feel like my experience as an educator, even teaching cooking to kids, motivating a 3-year-old to eat vegetables. And we had a great time. We'd make Asian dumplings and the parents would say, oh, he's never going to eat that. And I'm like, want to make a bet? And the kid just can't get enough. And it's because they were involved, right?
Yeah.
And so can I get kids involved in the process? Can I get parents trusting their child more? Or maybe not trusting their child so much? Because a lot of times people misjudge the developmental capabilities of a 2-year-old, for example, and expect a 2-year-old to make good choices. When in reality, what they need to do is they need to use a baby gate because they need to set that 2-year-old up for success instead of waiting for an accident to happen. They have to prevent it from happening in the first place. So I guess my babbling here is just that I love putting all these pieces together to support folks with whatever level of knowledge or even level of self-doubt they may come to me with, and see if I can then boost them up to feel like they're making confident choices about the welfare of their family.
I think it's brilliant. I can see a lot of how a lot of that stuff will be totally transferable to what you do now, because what you're describing there is about being somebody who's very adaptive for those best outcomes. So talking about, I can imagine a lot of teachers who might have been threatened by students who are doing or might know more than them or do more. You saw that rather than being threatened by that, you saw it as an opportunity to empower them.
Well, I was threatened at first, but then I thought, this is ridiculous because even though I'm 24, I am the adult in the room and I need to find a way to make this work, because I didn't like the feeling of being threatened. I was like, this is ridiculous, so.
Also, what we were talking earlier, I think, to say we can have those feelings, we can have those thoughts, we can have those judgments, but we ultimately can decide what drives our responses.
Yeah.
And it's changing our relationship with those kind of things. So early on, you were learning those adaptive skills, really. And I think, and this notion of trust as well, Sindor Pangal talks about this a lot. When we think about trust, do you trust your dog? Well, yeah, but do you trust them to behave? Do you trust them to be? And I think that's the first thing we have to recognize, I think, and this is what I'm sure you find, we'll go on to the kind of more specifics about working with the families now, but we almost have to invite our clients to trust themselves first, because we come with a lot of stuff that makes that difficult, and then think about trusting the child, then thinking about trusting and thinking about, I talk about boundaries. We have to think about those boundaries, but try and make sure they're not barriers to unmet need. Try and get that balance right. And that's the beautiful thing, that you and all other behavioral practitioners who work in this field of working with families have the opportunity to do. It's a bridging thing, isn't it? It's looking at those different threads that you need to pull.
Mm-hmm.
So I can totally see that from your own personal experiences and also your professional experiences, how this is a real passion thing for you, about turning up, being available, kind of feeling, well, I have kind of been there in my own way, so I get it, and having that non-judgmental space. So talk us through then a little bit. I think there's a few things that I think will be really interesting to know. The kind of cases that you kind of take on, the kind of situations that you have to deal with, and your strategies there, because I think that's something that we can all learn from, I think. And some of the kind of structural things that you put in place in working in these ways. So whichever ways you want to go into that, Lotta, because we can spend the rest of the talk looking at the specifics of the job, if you like.
Yeah. So I do feel like the types of people that come to me fall into one of maybe 4 main buckets, probably. So the people who have a dog that is, I call them dogs that are extra. So extra sensitive, extra reactive, extra fearful, or just overly happy, like over arousal because they're just full of joy, right? Just dogs that have this energy that gives the parent to be the little niggling of worry of what it will be like when they bring a child home into this family. So, like I mentioned, pregnant people who are about to adopt a child, use a surrogate, whatever, to get the dog ready for the child to enter this home and enter their life. So that's one bucket. The next bucket is really big, which is the bucket where the dog starts becoming reactive towards a toddler. And toddlers are notoriously unpredictable. And so that is a very hard phase for dogs, because the baby that didn't really do much and that was quite stationary, and they cry and poop and eat, but they're not on the move yet. Once they become on the move, a lot of dogs find trouble because they're either resource guarding, or they are herding dogs that like to chase things that move, or they want to control their environment, and so they block where the child is trying to go, or they follow them along and nip at them and things of that nature. But we get a lot of bites to the face with toddlers and kids through the age of 5 or so. Typically right here on the eye, we get a scrape above the eye and often a puncture below the eye. That's probably the most common, as the dog sort of comes in and does a scrape and a nip here. And part of that is because a toddler who's learning to walk is often at face-to-face height with many types of dogs. And if a dog is sitting on a sofa, for example, and the toddler pulls up because they're learning how to use their legs, then their face is right at the height where the dog is on the furniture. So around the eye, this is a very common spot, and it scares people to death. Also, just if the dog even growls at the child at that age, it's sort of a wake-up call, I think, for parents that they had been seeing the world with rose-colored glasses, and my dog is being super silly right now. She's rolling around. Anyway, she's really cute. So anyway, so that's some of the buckets. Then we get, maybe the dog that was fine with the children until they hit social maturity. Let me just pick her up. Hi, Sue. Oh boy, yes. Come here. Hi. You're noisy. You're noisy.
Who's this? Is this Michelle?
This is Olive, and she just turned 2 on Saturday. So she's very silly, my very silly adolescent. And she's just finishing her last heat before she gets spayed. So she's got extra hormones running through this little body. Anyway, so sometimes we get dogs that hit social maturity and they decide, actually, kids aren't for me. Those are the main buckets, really. I sometimes get calls from grandparents, and I love those calls because they're really thoughtful. It's like, my dog's never been around kids, but my grandkids are coming to stay with us for 2 weeks, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know how to help everybody be safe. Sometimes I get people who tell me that their dog barks and lunges at kids out in the world, and they suddenly are going to be having children like coming to visit, and they're really scared of how that's going to go. So those are the types of people that I'm dealing with. And like we talked about earlier, I don't really have a one size fits all solution for everybody, obviously, because every family is unique in terms of the dynamics of how many adults are living in the household, how many ages, how many children, what ages are they? Do they have a nanny? Do they have a babysitter? Do they have a night nanny, somebody who comes in and helps somebody with a newborn? That can be really hard, by the way, having this person that's moving around the house in the middle of the night, who maybe comes into the bedroom to bring the baby where the dog is on the bed. And it's, I mean, very scary types of things. But one thing that I would say is consistent, that I do try to integrate with every family that has children, or babies or toddlers with dogs, is some type of practice getting the dog comfortable behind a barrier of some sort. And what I mean by that is it could be a baby gate. It could be a retractable gate that's only used some of the time. It could be a pen. I have, well, I'll have to move the camera too much, but I have a pen here that I have out as a pen. But also sometimes I open it so it just divides the room. I like to be flexible, adaptable about how I use my space to say, I don't really like how you two are getting along right now, so I'm going to just put one of you on this side and have one of you on the other side. But I'm not isolating anybody. I'm just separating them. And I think this is a big distinction. A lot of parents are very hesitant to use barriers because they say, well, I didn't get a dog to keep them isolated. And I said, no, well, we're not isolating them. We're preventing an accident by using separation. But I can still easily see the dog. The dog can see me. I can still pet them over the barrier. I can still throw them cookies when they're being really well behaved. And I can even go over there easily and spend my time between my child on this side and my dog on that side, right? So I do think that that's a bit of a topic that sometimes parents need a bit of education on. That I know you love your dog, but we're not punishing your dog by using a barrier. We're saying, I need you not to make a mistake by using this barrier. So I will say that's one thing. Now, I want to address an elephant in the room here, and you and I have talked about this before, and I think this is very, very important. There are some naysayers, and they say, well, I am hiring a dog trainer, and I expect you to train my dog. And using a barrier is not training. That's management. Management is not the same as training. And I would disagree to a certain extent, because I believe that a dog that can learn to be comfortable behind a barrier, I believe training is involved in helping make that happen. It's not an instant thing. I don't just put up a barrier and hope for the best, right? And walk away. Just like you don't lay your baby in the crib and let him cry. I mean, some people do, and I apologize if that's insulting to you if you do, but a lot of people really try to support the baby and make the baby feel seen and make the baby not feel abandoned or whatever. The same is true with puppies and dogs, right? We have to support them through this learning process. So I'm going to stop there for a second because I see the wheels turning in your head, and then we'll go.
Well, no, I think the thing about management and adaptation is a really important integral part of most cases. I think it shouldn't be seen as an extra or a kind of an afterthought. I think it's integral. And
yeah,
I know I find it difficult, I have to say. I'll put my cards on the table to work in cases with children and dogs. So I tend not to. I've got amazing colleagues locally who do.
Yeah.
I do some, but mainly because I find it hard not to always advocate for the dog all the time.
Yeah.
So I think that's my bias. And but when I think having barriers, especially having barriers in a room when you can do it so that the dog has access to exit on that side, they can do their own thing. They can learn about that option of exits whilst the child's around, and being able to look at things. And for me, it's a big shift when you start to see that dog start air scenting around the child rather than just looking with their staring and that kind of thing. It shows they're starting to process better. So actually, in those situations, we can carry on learning a lot from the dog during that process in a really safe way. How are they processing in the environment? What does that look like? Are they able to make those good choices around exits and finding places for them to self-soothe or whatever they need to do? Or do they look a bit stuck? Because that gives us some ideas about the extra things that we can support them in finding those ways to kind of regulate better and decompress and whatever it is they need to do.
Definitely. I do think, though, that there is one misconception. I love talking about misconceptions because there's a lot of them, is that a dog who is uncomfortable should leave, right? A lot of people think that. Well, he didn't have to stay there. If he didn't like my child doing that, he should have gotten up and left, right? So people often blame the dog when the dog growls or nips at a child, for example, when the child is doing something inappropriate, and they think, well, if the dog didn't like it, why didn't he leave, right? But the problem is, if you're parenting in such a way where you're involved, let's say you're there, and if the dog is highly attached to you, the dog might not want to leave because you are their security. Theoretically, you're their security and you're there. And so leaving means they have to make a really difficult decision of leaving this person that often provides comfort to go and be alone. And a lot of dogs don't want to do that. However, I will say, and this is not me being judgy, this is just me being honest, because you said that we could do this here. If you are really their person who helps them be more secure, you can't let the child do certain things to the dog that makes them uncomfortable, right? So it's this tricky thing, right? Because if you want to support your dog, then you need to be watching your dog constantly, which is almost impossible, by the way, if you're raising kids. This is where it's so tricky, right? I want to support my dog, but I have to watch the dog all the time for signs of subtle body language that says, not so comfortable with this. I was fine, but now I'm not fine. Maybe the dog is removing consent. Maybe the dog was okay at first until the child didn't stop banging or clapping or playing the drum or playing with the noisy toy, or maybe having big feelings that the dog is totally relaxed and comfortable when the child has big feelings for 3 minutes, but not for 4 minutes, or not for 8 minutes, or not for 30 minutes, right? And the dog, trigger stacking is legit. The dog might just stop being comfortable. But if the parent is, as parents do, often focusing on the child, this is where it's so hard. This is where you really need to give that parent love and support, because it's so hard to do two things simultaneously, to give that child the love and support they need to try to self-regulate or whatever, while also noticing that the dog is getting increasingly agitated or whatever. So this is where barriers are super helpful, is where you have to say, I am your number one supporter, and I am noticing you're starting to feel stressed out. So I am going to move you over here because, number one, it gives you distance from the trigger. I hate to call kids triggers, but I do. And I tell parents that. I'm sorry to call your son a trigger, but in this context, he is a trigger, and they get it. They're not offended because I realize that I'm using weird words and comparing their children to dogs and stuff. And usually they understand why I'm doing that. But I need to give you greater distance from the trigger. And I also need to put a barrier in place in case you decide that you are not in control of yourself. And maybe you feel that barking and lunging is the way that you should handle this stress. I need a barrier in the way because my toddler is already vulnerable enough, and I don't need my toddler to be barked and lunged at right now, because that's not going to solve anything, right? And so if I have a barrier there, dog can do what it wants on its side of the barrier. It's like muzzle training. The dog still has its feelings, but the teeth don't touch the skin, right? So muzzles are another tool that can be helpful, but barriers can provide that, provide prevention of a bite or whatever else, which would then, of course, be a black mark if they eventually do decide to rehome a dog. A dog with a bite history is much harder to rehome than one without. And that's up to us. That's really up to us as the parents to prevent that from happening.
So what are the common strategies that you start off with then that you think are really important, the foundational things that should be addressed or put in place when starting with these cases?
I try to get a feel for how they use their space first. What kind of life do you live? What kind of family dynamic do you have? What's your routine like? Are you home? Are you at work all day? Are your kids at daycare? Is it really stressful in the morning and the evening when you're getting ready to send everybody off to school or daycare? And then at night when everyone is coming home and rejoining the dog for the first time. So I need to kind of understand where the tricky routine places are for that family, and also the tricky physical locations in the home. Where are you when you notice challenges arising? Is it when you're trying to give your child a bath and the dog is over aroused because your child is splashing? Is it under the breakfast table where they're eating and your kid's making a mess and the dog is jumping all over the place trying to steal food? Is it bedtime? Is it barking at the mailman? Like what are your actual challenges? So once I figure out where in their routine and in their space we're dealing with challenges, then I can start making recommendations about how to try to make their life easier. And I know, again, I'm trying to always think outside the box. And I know this sounds totally unrelated to dog training, but stick with me for a second. Sometimes I'll even recommend that a parent buy an automatic coffee maker. I know this sounds ridiculous, but for example, if the parent is struggling because they have their back to everybody, because you're functioning, you're trying to make food for yourself or whatever, and their morning coffee is integral to their mental well-being, and they're turning their back to whatever shenanigans are happening behind them to make that morning cup of coffee. Something as simple as an automatic coffee maker that is ready in the morning when they wake up can be such a gift, because the parent doesn't have to focus on something that is not where the fire is starting. You know what I mean? The kids, dogs, whatever. Figuring out how to feed the animals, for example. Could they feed in a way that takes a little longer? Maybe with a ball that they roll around in a separate room and the dog can be busy there while you're getting the kids ready in the morning. Some of this relies on my experience as a parent, because I know what the routine looks like, right? Sometimes it's training, right? Sometimes we think, the dog is trying to take the dirty diapers. That's gross. That's a problem. What could I do to help you so that doesn't happen? But I know you really miss your dog and you don't want to close the door to the nursery and isolate your dog. What if we had a nice mat behavior where the dog could be with you, but not be jumping to try to take the dirty diaper? Now, I will say, mat training, I have issues with that to a certain extent, because a lot of people say that's the most important behavior you train a dog when you have children. And I think it's a great behavior to have until you have mobile children, because if a dog is trained to lay on a mat until they're released, and you have a toddler, it's getting close, the dog could be like, oh, I don't know if I can swear. Can I swear here? The dog's like, oh, shit, somebody's coming. I'm not comfortable, but you haven't released them. Then we have a problem, right? Then they protect themselves. They bark and lunge, they snap, they bite. So mat training, I have issues with. If you want to bathe your baby and have your dog lay on a mat next to you so you can pet your dog while your child is playing in the bathtub. I pet my dog. I love you so much. Oh, look at that. You made a mohawk with your bath hair. Great. What a great kid. But I love my dog simultaneously. A mat behavior would be great for that, because I know they're not trying to jump in the bathtub. I know they're not trying to steal a diaper. But this is very context dependent. I never want my dog to feel trapped. I never want my dog to be able to not offer consent to being approached. Same with tethers, right? A tether has its place, right? But if a dog can't get away, we get bites. So training is really helpful in many cases. If I could teach my dog not to bolt out the door when I open the door because I'm trying to get a baby, a toddler, a car seat, a diaper bag, a stroller out the front door, and I open my front door and my dog runs out, it's the last thing I can handle, right?
Yeah.
So training is so important there, right? Can I have you wait behind a threshold until I'm ready to clip your leash on and say, let's go for a walk, right? But I think there's a misconception too that some people assume that because their dog is really well trained, that their dog will feel fine around their child. Their dog may act polite around their child because it's been taught to do behaviors, but doing a behavior and being able to do a behavior doesn't necessarily mean that your dog feels okay, right? How is your dog feeling?
Let's go on to that bit, because this is
Yep.
why I really wanted to have a conversation in the group,
Okay.
because what you've described there is really important. This is just something I'm very keen on making sure we address the balance a little bit, because I talk a lot about, I've been involved in the kind of beyond the operant conversations and thinking about, the dog and, and being mindful of even the coercive potential of reinforcement even, and just recognizing these things. But equally, it shouldn't be about, well, we don't do any training at all then. And I think being like that is a bit of a privilege. We were able to have that privilege with bringing up Molly, because we don't have little ones running around. We don't have a dog who's going to struggle around that. And I think what you beautifully described there is a place for having training as a form of communication with the dog. I kind of need you to do this now because I also need to do this because I'm a mom or I'm a dad or whatever you're doing. But also, this is the important bit, recognizing that those are bits that are context driven at times to help the parent juggle those balls better. But we shouldn't be doing that at the kind of downplaying of the dog's emotional needs, because that's quite often what happens. And I've worked with so many cases where the parent has been lulled into this false sense of security that somehow their dog is compliant, the dog is even happy. Well, guess what? The dog might be more compliant, but it doesn't mean that they're happy or they're coping. And then that snap, that bite comes out the blue, but it was waiting. And especially that notion of kind of enforced immobilization, as Laura Donaldson calls it, where people think, well, my dog's in its happy place because that's what I've trained to, but are they? But this is the beautiful way you've described that, the nuances of how we have to think about this stuff. And as professionals, we have to make sure that we're equipping the end user, if you like, which is that parent, to be able to go through their day with as little extra stress as possible, because it's stressful enough already, right?
It's so hard.
So hard. And this is just that life real that you deal with so well. That's why this conversation is called Keeping It Real, really working with families and dogs. So let's think about the dog's emotional state then, because that is the challenge, isn't it? I think. And one other thing I just want to mention, actually, just very quickly for that. Do you find that there is an extra friction with the parenting dynamic? Because it's often the mom, but not always. It can be the dad, but the one who's the primary caregiver, who's at home, and the other parent, they may be at work, they might just see snapshots, who don't get the complexities of this other stuff, and might always fall in behind the dog or always fall in behind this. Do you have to do that?
It's crazy sometimes. So a common dynamic, and I know this is like gender stereotypical, and I apologize for if your family is not this way. A common experience that I have, one partner is at work, one partner is home with the children. The bite happens when the parent who is home with the children all day is around. So the parent who's at work didn't see what caused it. They didn't see the triggers that stacked up all day long to get to that point. It's very easy, especially if that person, if it was their dog first, before they met their partner and joined houses and whatever, it's very common for one partner, the working one who's not home, to blame the one who is there. I had one extreme, I don't know if I told you this when we talked a couple of weeks ago. I had one extreme client. This blew me away, and I like to use it as an example of how dramatically different two people can approach a situation. I had a situation with a client where it was a husband and wife, and they had a toddler, and they were staying with the grandparents in this big, beautiful house for a holiday. And the dog was laying in the sun over here, and the parents had gone to the grocery store. So the grandparents were home, and they were hanging out, and they were all in the same room with the dog and the toddler. And the dog is laying in the sun over here. And the toddler on the opposite side of the room just walked across the room. Didn't, now granted, I don't know the history at that point. I didn't know if the toddler had tormented the dog in the past. I don't know if the dog was sick. I don't know any of these things. This is why they came to me. The child just walked across the room. The dog got up out of its sunny place on the floor, ran across the room and bit the child in the face. It was terrifying. That is not common, by the way. It's not a super common thing. It was really crazy. But this dog had belonged to the dad for years before he met the wife. This dog had gotten him through some tough stages of his life. This is a story I hear a lot about. The dog has been my soulmate, whatever. We're having this conversation. The parents are sitting in front of me. I see everybody over Zoom. I have clients all over the world. They're sitting in front of me. They're both crying. The woman is scared to death. She is now scared of the dog, even though it's never done anything to her. She's scared because her toddler was approached from across the room to be bitten. She was afraid. She didn't want to keep the dog. Totally uncomfortable. The dad refused to consider not having the dog be part of their family because it had gotten him through some hard times. And we were at an impasse because I always try to work to this is going to sound bad. I don't think it's the right words. I say the lowest common denominator in terms of fear. The parent who is the most fearful, that's the person I want to support the most because their feelings are real. And if they're afraid, shit's going to go down and it's not going to be pretty. So I want that person to be supported for safety. This dad got to the point where he said, I'll get a separate apartment where I can live with the dog. And I was like, and she looked at him and I looked at him and I was like, I wish I had like therapists on speed dial at that point, because this was beyond the scope of the work that I could do at this point, that he would sacrifice his role as a parent, as a spouse, as a father to this toddler to keep this dog alive and to prevent this dog from biting his kid again. I mean, kudos to his devotion to the dog, but not kudos to his devotion to his family, because he, in many cases, this is where all that judgment comes in of like, dude, how could you love your dog more than you love your family? And it's so easy to criticize in a situation like that. I think he was just processing. I don't think that was the route they ultimately took. I ended up not continuing to work with them. I supported them through that initial situation, and I don't know what happened. Sometimes when I deal with cases that are so extreme, and I'm really honest with the options, I think people really have to take some time and sit with the information I've given them. And sometimes they don't call back because it's just too hard to fathom that they have to actually make a decision. So, I mean, that happens to all of us. I mean, sometimes you get ghosted, and oftentimes, honestly, I get called only once, and that's all I need. That's all I need to help change someone's life with their dog, is just to have a really good heart to heart and give them a handful of suggestions to make their life easier. And they don't need ongoing support. So it's interesting, but.
And there's a big lack of awareness out there about, because there's so much misinformation about who dogs are and what they need. I think a lot of the time to have a safe space where people could have somebody give a more reasoned and kind of slightly detached overview. It can be hugely powerful and very therapeutic for them, very cathartic, actually, I think. And also, I think you mentioned it there, when you lose confidence, especially as a primary caregiver with your dog, it can be really, really challenging to move forward from that. It can be very, very difficult. And I think a lot of people listening in will really relate to that kind of scenario of, something happening when one of the primary, the caregivers are at work or away, and then, a lot of the friction then between that relationship. And then also if you happen to have one of them who has that connection with that dog, and we see our dogs as family often, and sometimes for some people that dog might be their first kind of secure attachment, actually. So it's a big thing, so it's hard.
Mhm.
These cases are bloody difficult. There's my turn to swear.
Yeah.
So let's think about, we got about 10 minutes left here. So let's think about the dog side of stuff then. So what are your priorities then in regarding what is it you want to learn from the dog, really, in these cases, and how do you go about supporting that awareness for the human parent about the dog, the dog child, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about quality of life, and quality of life can mean a lot of different things based on the dog, right? Quality of life might just mean having their needs met, making sure they're having really fun enrichment outings, or even at home, or it depends on who they are as a dog, whether or not their needs can be met. For example, I've had clients who've had guardian breeds, but they live in an apartment building, and that can be really hard, or all kinds of things. Oftentimes herding breeds, and the parents don't want the dogs chasing the children. And I think, oh, and what kind of research did you do before you chose this breed? This is the thought that's going on, but it's not a productive conversation to have because they already have the dog. So that sometimes is a thought bubble I try to push back and not say out loud, because it doesn't matter. It's the dog they've got. Sometimes dogs are really anxious. Sometimes dogs' biochemistry isn't quite right. Sometimes I am a very strong advocate of collaborating with veterinary behaviorists. And I recommend that a lot of people talk to their vet, and just tell your vet you're working with a dog and child specialist. We're curious about whether or not meds might help this dog to cope better with the stressful environment in which they find themselves. And I always say, I'm not a vet. I can't give you medical advice, but there are some people that need a little bit of, mental health, as as a practitioner of that. Some people are weird about medications, and they have their own biases. And so I talk to them about my experience as a teacher, and how I had students that on occasion had, severe ADHD, and they would start medication that changed their entire academic trajectory because they could actually process information for the first time. And I like that as an analogy, because I feel that a lot of dogs who are stressed out or overly anxious can't process information, and can't take in any predictability, or take in any structure that the parents are trying to set up, and they react first, and they can't think. So it is a relatable analogy. I try to help them to understand that. I also tell them you wouldn't deny insulin to a diabetic if they really need persuading. But anyway, we do sometimes discuss medication. I do think that for many dogs, it can take the edge off, such that they can start to learn and process their environment before they react. But again, quality of life. Is the dog happy? Is the dog really anxious? I had a client the other night. The dad had the appointment with me, and the wife was coming home with the children. So I had the dad alone, and it was great. And the dog was on the sofa with him. I could see the dog. The dog was totally relaxed and comfortable with just the dad. Then the mom came in, and the dad, it was great timing. Oh my gosh, it was amazing. So the dad could film this for me. I was sitting right there watching the whole thing happen. The front door is near the sofa. The dog got really excited. Mom was coming in, but I need you to picture what this chaos looks like. The dog is elevated, standing on the back of the couch, which is right next to the front door. The mom walks in holding an infant seat with their 2-month-old baby and their 20-month-old toddler who's carrying a helium balloon. Okay. And the three of them are trying to smush through this front door. The mom is getting all, convoluting herself to try to, contortionist, like, can I get through the door? And I have to come up the steps and push the baby carrier through, and all of the things. And the dog's body language changed in an instant. The dog first was soft and happy. Then the dog froze, went still. I saw that pucker. The ears went back. The mouth went tense, and my stomach sank. And I was like, okay. And I won't say the guy's name. Let's call him Chris. I said, Chris, I need you right now to make 1,000% sure that your child, Sam, cannot go anywhere near your dog right now. I'm really nervous about how your dog looks right now. And I don't normally say something so firmly, but right now my stomach is really tense and I have butterflies in my stomach right now. Did you notice how your dog's body language changed? And he goes, yeah, that's a problem. We see that a lot. We see him, he's like Jekyll and Hyde. And I was like, this dog had bitten 13 times.
Wow.
13 times. And so, of course, there's a conversation that has to be had. And I was able to talk to the mom after she got settled. And, you know, we discussed briefly euthanasia. She said the idea made her feel like throwing up. And I said, I really understand that. You really love your dog. You really love your dog. I know it's a hard thing to think about. And then we talked about, you know, liability, and we talked about, you know this about your dog, and people can be litigious if something happens. What if you ever want to have kids come over? That dog scared the bejesus out of me. It has been a long time since a dog has really terrified me like that. I still get shivers when I think about it. I texted my girlfriend after. I was like, I just saw the scariest thing on my Zoom. So anyway, how do we make big decisions? Quality of life for the dog. That dog did not feel good. It was so obvious that dog was not a happy dog. Anyway, sorry to end on such a bummer of a note, but sometimes something hits you over the head like that and you're like,
I
God,
think a lot of people relate
they're
to that.
paying me to be honest, and I have to tell them what I think.
I think, you know, and I say we could all relate to that. I think some of these outcomes are challenging, and I think there's lots of different factors that we have to take on board. But thinking about the positive side of stuff, though, I guess what you're talking about a little bit earlier, when you're able to kind of really understand the dynamics, the structural dynamics of that parenting life, you can then hone in on the kind of pressure points, those points that you can provide some relief for the caregiver and also for the dog. And then also start the education of empowering the caregiver with understanding what those signs look like ahead of time for the dog, so they can provide relief and safety for their dog as part of that process. So I guess that's what you look at doing.
Keep this book. Wait, hold on. There you go. I keep this book on my desk, Doggy Language by Lily Chin. And I send the link out to it constantly for people to purchase it. And we talk a lot about this. We talk a lot about, how do you notice how your dog is feeling? How can you then help your dog? So this dog on the sofa got really tense. Some of the things we had spent time in the consult discussing would be, how can we give this dog a safe space so that we can ensure safety of your children, right? But without being able to read the dog, we're stuck, right? There's a lack of information. If they don't know how the dog is feeling, then we're kind of dead in the water, right? That's one of the very first steps that we really have to work on.
We've only got a couple of minutes. I know you've got to go off to another point, but just very quickly, have you found that by plugging in a little bit into these parents' lives, giving them almost permission, I guess, sometimes to kind of let go of some stuff or to do things differently, but also giving them a window into that dog's lived experience for them to understand about developmental stages, about regulation, it actually helps them to see their human kid differently?
Absolutely. Yes, all the time. And I say, some people get really offended when I compare your dog to your child, but there's so many similarities in terms of sensitive periods and development and maturity and frontal lobe development, I guess, not to reuse that word, but yeah, and the support they need, right? Gentle parenting. I did a little podcast about this once, that gentle parenting strategies that you can use for both your dog and your child, using words like, instead of running up in a moment of chaos and saying, no, stop it. Instead saying, oh, I see you want to do this thing. I can't let you do that right now. And then implementing management or giving them an alternate behavior. It's just like dog training, using these things with kids, giving them something else you can say yes to. I tell my clients that I want to help them say yes more and say no less, right? I want you to say yes, because when I was a parent and when I was really struggling with my son, I hated myself as a parent. I was saying no all the time. I was not the kind of parent I thought I was going to be. I had all these great images, and I was a really good parent when things were going smoothly. And with my daughter, things were smooth more often. And we did, a lot of the things that I really wanted to do as a parent. I was really proud of that. But when I was pushed to like my breaking point, I didn't like my own response. I didn't like how that was. And if I had had a coach like me, even if it wasn't related to him and my dog simultaneously, to help me parent differently, to take space for myself, which a lot of parents can't do without management or without understanding that we all get trigger stacked. Nobody understood. People would just back away and be like, whatever she's going through, it's hard, and I'll see her when it's over. There were not a lot of people that stuck by us because they saw how hard it was and they just didn't want to get involved, which kind of sucked, but that's how it was.
I hear you on that. And I think this is the thing. I think when we get into that kind of when our own nervous system starts to get a bit elevated and we start to find it hard to find our base levels, and our own trauma responses come out, our own survival responses come out, and we need those safe spaces. I think, it's interesting when we had this big advent of parenting coaches in the 90s, and a lot of people push back that, a lot of negative press, how silly. But it's integral. As a society, we should be thinking of it more, I think.
Yeah.
That's been an amazing conversation, Michelle. Thank you so much for your time. So how can people find out more about what you do? And
thank you. They can go to my website, which is poochparenting.net. I have programs for both dog pros where we discuss cases and I push you to think about how you would answer client questions. And I have a lot of ready-made for you handouts because I know exactly what your clients need after only doing this for 8 years. So you don't have to create all those kinds of things for yourself. So I have programs for dog pros who maybe don't feel super confident working kid cases, but would maybe like to try some more confidently. I will put in a plug. This is totally bad business, by the way, but I am going to also put in a plug. If for those of you in the UK, Debbie from Kids Around Dogs does that locally for you. Debbie and I are good friends, and I'm actually one of her only American CAD professionals. But if you want someone UK time zone, go for Debbie. If you're anywhere else, feel free to support me. Debbie and I collaborate a lot. And then I see clients from all over the world who are just struggling and need to be seen, really. And I have a podcast, so that's free. I have two. One's called the Pooch Parenting Podcast, and one is called, it's a limited series called Parenting Kids and Dogs 101.
brilliant.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much for
Thanks,
it's been a great conversation, and perhaps we should do a bit of a part 2, I think, because there's a lot of other bits that we could deep dive into. And yeah, I love Debbie as well, and she talks very fondly of you.
I love her.
I think it's a great example of collaboration, I think, across the pond.
And real quick, I would say, because I have to run, if in your Facebook group where you share this, if anyone has questions for me over the next 2 days or so, I have plenty of time, just not right the second. And I feel free to ask questions under this video.
Yes, yeah.
And I will, if that's okay with Andy, I will answer there. And I love to hear from folks. So feel free to ask anything. I'm an open book.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you, Michelle. And yeah, please do that. And I'll tag you into things when they come up.
Great.
The next chat in the group is on Thursday. This will be the last one of the year, and it's our kind of traditional look at ACE with Sarah Fisher. So Sarah Fisher's coming in, having an ACE Christmas along with Matt Donovan. And also, this is quite cool, actually, Michelle. We've got people who have requested to come and be part of the Zoom room so they can share with Sarah their own stories of how they've used So that's going to be a really special event. So that's this Thursday, 6:30 UK time. Thank you again, Michelle.
Thanks, Andy. Great to see you.